Lighter, and finally Svenja. So Dr. Munang, if you have some ideas about where particularly you think there could be targeted climate finance spent.
Thank you very much, Catherine, and also to the colleagues that have shared some very amazing points. I think the point is we need to look at Africa is pretty much a real continent. And when I presented in my opening remarks, I indicated that the informal sector in Africa that actually provide 80% of the work to the informal youth, they are actually the economic locomotive of the continent. You can't wipe them out. And they are actually also those who are the most vulnerable. And if we are able to leverage on structures in communities and societies that these people are used to, and they build their social capital over time, what is called communal cooperatives, and inject adaptation finance through these structures that have been established and are owned by the community, we will make a difference. But that has not happened. And I gave the example of the Buganda Kingdom, where we're working with the Buganda Kingdom and leveraging what is called PEOSA, which is a savings organization that is in every community in the Kingdom of Buganda. And what we are doing is that we're leveraging that cooperative and delivering climate action solutions through them so that at least they can be able to add value to the agricultural products they are producing, and when they sell them, they put more money in their pockets and they plow them back to that saving. So what should happen is that adaptation financing should be leveraged as a de-risking tool, and then engage these communities, communal cooperatives, so that those who are able to take finance and default, that can cover. And it will also act as an incentive, because at the same time, when you engage these communal cooperatives and engage the community, everyone will then be able to benefit and build on what has already proven to work, and that reduces risk. And these are very simple, novel approaches that have not been tapped into, and projects on adaptation financing should be able to leverage on these communal cooperatives.
Thank you. And it sounds very responsive to the particular conditions of Africa as well. I think that's a really interesting response. It's actually kind of interesting segue into the next question I want to ask, because it brings up technology. And especially in the area of mitigation, there's so much attention to possible technological solutions. You know, how can we make renewable energy more reliable? How can we possibly develop whole new geoengineering solutions and things like that? And I wonder, when you look at adaptation, to what extent do you think that we also need technological solutions for adaptation? Or would you say that the solutions to adaptation are more likely to come from the social side of life rather than the technological side of life? And we'll run through you in the same order again. So Richard Munang, technology, social, where is it that we look for solutions?
Yeah, thanks again, Catherine. I think both. The point is, my first point was that we need mitigation to power adaptation. And that is actually the biggest missing point that have existed, that adaptation is seen as a standalone and as a silo. Then that way we will only be furthering social endeavors rather than adaptation as an investment opportunity. Very practical example. Mothers across the continent grow food. Some of them apply ecosystem-based adaptation, organic farming. But when they have bumper harvest, they lose it. They are losing $48 billion US. Why? Because they cannot have a simple solar dryer, which is a mitigation technology that if it is decentralized to communities, they can then be able to dry their vegetables, dry their corn, dry fruits, and then be able to sell it. Even if they don't have a market immediately, they can be able to store it up to 6 months or so. We talk about solar fridges, which if you look across the continent, a lot of food wastage as a result of lack of storage. You talk of solar power irrigation that is needed in dry land areas. So there is absolutely no way that adaptation as a standalone, without using mitigation to power actions, can we truly make adaptation an investment opportunity. But there is one aspect that I alluded to earlier. In as much as we talk of these aspects, if we forget the soft aspect of inspiring people to see opportunities in adaptation, of making people to retool their skills which fit into the climate literacy capacity building, but more importantly, making people to become inspired and pick up these solutions, then we will have all the resources and we will not be able to have the passionate, inspired population, especially the young people, to pick up and drive these and ensure transformational development.
Thank you. That was such a I actually was expecting that everybody would say that technology wasn't important, but I think you persuaded me that there's a definite role there through mitigation. So I learned, actually I've learned a lot today, but that was definitely something that I learned that I hadn't thought about. I have some questions that are being fed to me from the audience. But our first question then comes from Jacob Frank, who's an LSE alumni and an intern at the United Nations Development Coordination Office. And Jacob is asking, how do you think UN country teams could support governments with climate adaptation and data gathering, things that a couple of you mentioned? So if anybody would like to answer there. Richard, would you like to also come in on this question?
Thank you very much, and I'll build on what Chris and Sonja have said. The point that I'm going to take it a little bit out of the norm that we've heard. Sometimes actions inform assessments. I mean, data is not just Metro. Yeah, Metro is very, very important. So we need a system thinking approach here, whereby if you look at the African continent, let me take West Africa and an example of what is called Zai, which is an indigenous technique that have been applied during drought and in the Sahel. And it resulted in up to about 500% yields in 1 acre. To what extent do we leverage that data to also help inform policy? Yes, make data is important. But what about practical data? Indigenous techniques that needs to be leveraged to become part and parcel of policy making and drive transformational change. To leverage metadata and leverage this indigenous knowledge and the data that has been generated, combined together to make informed decisions will be more solid and robust than only focusing on med. That's what I just wanted to add to that.
A very important addition. I think, yes, well taken. Reminded me a bit of the technologies answer too, of looking to some of the technologies that we already have and looking to some of the data that we already have. Yeah, such a difficulty of looking at just the African region when not only the climate but also the economic system is in many ways a global phenomenon. Richard, what will you add to this?
I mentioned here, and I think because colleagues have already alluded to the reality of what we know. But there are certain things that can be controlled right down by the populace where they are. The continent imports food worth 35 billion and above every year because of lack of value addition. The continent is losing 68 billion every year because of land degradation. And the continent loses food worth 48 billion as a result of post-harvest losses. So let's just take a step back. Yes, without ignoring the fact that the bauxite, the cobalt, and all those, they're there. But how about focusing to then develop the value chain so that people can be lifted from the bottom of the pyramid? And then you will not only be recouping the 48 billion, but we also ensure that you can reverse the 35 billion. So we're talking 83 billion US dollars here. This is per year. What if focus was on this, whereby communities, mothers in villages, the youth can start, many of them are developing these solutions, and we put our energy there. Am I trying to say that the issue of minerals is not important? No, but how many people do minerals benefit in the continent? How many employment opportunities are created for the young people? Why don't we then build on what we have control over, so that at least once we turbocharge this bottom, we can then be able to create more opportunities that will make the top obsolete. Thank you.
Thank you for that succinct alternative vision to how things are currently. That was, very interesting. So we have a kind of related question from somebody who sounds like he could be a student in my own department, Jock Wharton, who's an LSE student. My department, the Department of International Development, is asking some questions here that I think really closely relate to what this last question raised. Can adaptation investments exist as a standalone? Dr. Munang.
Yeah, thank you very much, Catherine. I think colleagues have already touched most of the aspects. I think also the nomenclature or the narrative needs to be blamed, and I think colleagues mentioned this. If you talk adaptation just as adaptation, it starts to alienate those who have already heard about this for 26 years. How about we talk development from opportunities and investment perspective? Let me just take a very practical example. In Africa, over 84% of energy impoverished citizens live in rural areas. In those areas, grid electricity cannot reach them, but off-grid and renewable can reach them. But these are also the people who suffer the biggest post-harvest losses. What if this clean energy is decentralized so that at least they can add value to put more money in their pocket? That part of development, they set up their enterprises and pay taxes so that at least the economic fabric can be strengthened. That's development. So to discuss development, especially adaptation and development, they are intertwined. But I think the opportunities perspective that adaptation brings should be more championed and pushed forward, so that development and adaptation can go one in one. Thank you.
Thanks, and very cynical. So, Richard, you have our final word here. What can you tell us about the governance issue, and are you going to send us out on this final depressing note, or do you see some hope for better possibilities?
I think Professor Chris Gordon have laid it out very well, and I think I'll just add to that, which most of the aspects have already been touched. The governance at the central level, I mean, have issues, of course, but Africa governance is not just at the central level. I mean, there are local governance, and I keep going back to that. And these are untapped structures, these are untapped spaces that have not been used as conduits to be able to deliver adaptation, not just in terms of money, but even to tap into the human capital that have existed and can actually be coordinated. Because there are two things here that I really wanted to stress. Having money and implementing actions is one aspect. But if we want to ensure traceability and accountability, we must use institutions and structures that people trust in. And these local structures, communal cooperatives, local traditional structures that are still in place, that people have respect for them, needs to be tapped into. And it is up to us, the international community, the academic institutions and researchers, to continue to now change this narrative. And the other part that Prof touched, which is very, very important, I mean, the youth, they are energetic, vibrant, and innovative. And most of them in their different spaces are developing innovations that are actually helping mothers in villages. How do we tap into that ingenuity and not only focus on the central government, but because when the bottom works, there is absolutely no way that the top will not respond to it. Because policymakers don't really buy into concepts or ideas. They love to see success and already workable examples that they can be able to get attracted towards. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I think everybody will agree with me that this has been a really successful discussion of adaptation in Africa, because on the one hand, I feel like we have a better understanding of the problem itself. We've heard many interesting observations on the problem, and we've also had really useful discussion about some of the different approaches that might work, why finance is necessary but may not be enough. And then these final points that Richard was stressing, and Chris before him and others, just the crucial element of looking to the local level. Timo and Svenja brought our attention there, looking to the local level, looking to youth. These are really important places for looking for possible solutions to the issue of adaptation. So there's just